At 7:42 in the morning on March 6, 1945, Corporal Clarence Smoyer pressed his eye against a gun sight inside an American Pershing tank called Eagle 7, rolling through the smoking ruins of Cologne, Germany. 21 years old, 7 months in combat, 5 enemy tanks already destroyed. Ahead of him, hidden in the shadow of a great cathedral, a German Panther tank waited in ambush, its long gun having just killed 2 American Shermans in seconds. Inside that Panther, a German officer named Wilhelm Bartelborth stared through his own gun sight at a strange, low, angular shape rolling into the intersection. He had never seen a tank built like it. It looked almost German. For half a second, he held his fire, unsure whether he was staring at friend or enemy. That half a second would decide who lived and who burned inside 46 tons of steel. Only 20 of these experimental American tanks existed anywhere in Europe. The Army had delayed building them for 3 years while men died inside Shermans that German guns tore open like tin cans. Clarence Smoyer had grown up in coal country, Pennsylvania, a quiet boy who had never once thrown a punch. Now he sat behind the most powerful gun in the American arsenal, seconds from firing the shots that would make him famous and haunt him for the next 68 years. Clarence Smoyer had grown up in Laheyton, Pennsylvania, in coal country, where his father worked the mines and the air always smelled faintly of soot. He had never been in a fistfight in his life. He had gone hunting exactly once, for rabbit, and felt sick afterward, the memory of the animal's small body staying with him for weeks. He was the kind of young man who apologized when he bumped into furniture, who still wrote letters home describing the weather. He was the last person anyone from his hometown would have picked to become one of the deadliest tank gunners in the European theater. But by March of 1945, that was exactly what he had become, and the quiet coal town boy barely recognized the steady hands that now rested on a 90mm trigger. By that spring, the United States Army had lost thousands of Sherman tanks to German guns. The Panther outweighed the Sherman by 10 tons. The Tiger weighed even more. German 75mm and 88mm guns could penetrate Sherman armor at ranges where American 75mm rounds simply bounced off German steel. During the Battle of the Bulge 3 months earlier, American tank battalions had been devastated. Entire companies lost half their vehicles in single engagements. Crew survival rates told the real story. If a Sherman got hit, the men inside had seconds to escape before the ammunition cooked off and turned 33 tons of steel into a crematorium. The problem had been obvious since Normandy. The solution had been delayed for 3 years. Army Ground Forces Command, led by Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, had insisted for years that the Sherman was adequate, that tank destroyers would handle enemy armor, that American doctrine called for tanks to support infantry and avoid tank versus tank combat. German doctrine said otherwise. So did the reality on the battlefield. The Ordnance Department had designed a heavier tank as early as 1942. Prototype after prototype added armor, improved the gun, refined the suspension. Each version also grew heavier and more complex. McNair's staff rejected proposal after proposal. The Sherman had worked well enough in North Africa, they argued. Why fix what did not appear broken? By 1944, that argument was killing American tank crews. The Battle of the Bulge changed everything. Roughly 400 German tanks, including Panthers and the newer Tiger II, smashed into American lines in December of 1944. Sherman crews fought bravely and died quickly. After the Ardennes, nobody in Washington could pretend the Sherman was sufficient anymore. In January of 1945, the first 20 of the new heavy tanks, soon designated the Pershing, arrived at the Belgian port of Antwerp. General Omar Bradley split the shipment between 2 veteran divisions, 10 tanks to the 3rd Armored, 10 to the 9th Armored. The tanks reached a maintenance depot near Aachen, Germany, in mid-February. Division commanders sent their best crews for training. The Pershing had a different transmission than the Sherman, but similar controls. Each crew fired roughly 24 rounds to familiarize themselves with the new 90mm main gun. The muzzle flash was bigger. The The recoil was harder. The noise made a man's ears ring even through the intercom headset. Smoyer remembered his first test fire well. A farmhouse chimney stood roughly 1,200 yards downrange. Major General Maurice Rose, commander of the 3rd Armored Division, stood 20 feet behind the tank with his staff, watching. Rose had picked the target himself. Smoyer centered the reticle on the chimney and pulled the trigger. The muzzle blast knocked Rose and several officers near him flat onto their backs. The chimney exploded into fragments. Rose climbed back to his feet, brushed the dirt from his uniform, and grinned. Smoyer hit 2 more chimneys at even longer range. Rose approved the Pershing for combat that same afternoon. The first Pershings entered combat on February 25th, near the Roer River. One was knocked out the next day by a hidden Tiger. The others killed German tanks at ranges where Sherman's would have been helpless. By early March, the 3rd Armored Division was pushing hard toward the Rhine. Cologne sat on the western bank, Germany's 4th largest city, once home to nearly 1 million people, now a wasteland of rubble and drifting smoke. 262 Allied bombing raids had reduced most of the city to broken stone and twisted steel. Only the twin spires of Cologne Cathedral still stood, rising above the destruction like tombstones over a grave that stretched for miles. On the morning of March 6th, Smoyer's crew received their orders. They would lead the advance into the Cologne city center. Their Pershing, one of only 20 in all of Europe, would be first through every intersection, first to draw fire from every hidden anti-tank gun hiding in the ruins. Rose himself had chosen them for the mission. It was supposed to be an honor. Smoyer touched the small Bible tucked into his breast pocket and watched the streets ahead narrow into shadow. The Pershing lurched forward at 8 o'clock that morning. Staff Sergeant Robert Early commanded from the turret. Corporal John DeRiggi loaded the 90mm rounds. Private Homer Davis assisted on the bow machine gun. Private William McVeigh drove. Smoyer manned the main gun. They had been a crew together since September of 1944, fighting through the hedgerows of Normandy and the snowdrifts of the Ardennes in an ordinary Sherman. 3 weeks earlier they had received the Pershing. The crew had named their new tank Eagle 7, after the Philadelphia Eagles. Cologne had been Germany's 4th largest city, home to roughly 1 million people before the war. Now perhaps 40,000 remained, hiding in cellars and subway tunnels beneath mountains of rubble. The streets had become canyons of broken masonry. 3-story apartment blocks had collapsed straight into the roadways. Tram lines twisted into the air like metal vines. Every intersection offered a dozen firing positions for German Panzerfaust teams. Every basement window could hide an 88mm anti-tank gun. The 3rd Armored Division had entered Cologne's outskirts on March 2nd. 4 days of house-to-house fighting had followed. German defenders used the city's own infrastructure against the Americans. Underground pedestrian tunnels connected basements across entire blocks. Soldiers called them mouse trails. German infantry would appear suddenly behind American positions, attack, then vanish back underground before anyone could respond. Snipers fired from church steeples and factory smokestacks. Anti-tank crews waited patiently until American vehicles passed, then fired into the thin rear armor. The Pershing's advantages were obvious on paper. Its frontal armor measured roughly 4 inches thick, nearly double the Sherman's protection. The 90mm gun could penetrate any German tank at ordinary combat range, but in urban warfare, those advantages meant less than they should have. A Panzerfaust fired from 20 feet away did not care how thick the armor was. Molotov cocktails dropped from 3rd-story windows, landed on engine decks where the armor was thinnest of all. The Pershing weighed 46 tons. Many of Cologne's bridges could no longer support that weight. Streets that Sherman's navigated easily had become traps for the heavier vehicle. Smoyer watched through his periscope as Eagle 7 rolled past the remnants of what had once been a shopping district. Mannequins lay scattered among the bricks and broken glass, their painted faces staring up at a sky the color of ash. An overturned streetcar sat with its windows blown out, its paint blistered black from some earlier fire. Fire had consumed entire blocks days before, and the smell of smoke and worse things crept steadily through the tank's ventilation system, thick enough to taste at the back of the throat. Every 40 yards or so, the Pershing stopped while McVeigh checked the road ahead for obstacles. Rubble could hide mines. Shell craters could break a track in an instant. The radio crackled with reports from other units. Sherman tanks were clearing the side streets. Infantry squads moved building to building, slow and careful. German resistance seemed lighter than expected. Most Wehrmacht units had withdrawn across the Rhine during the night. The bridges were rigged with demolition charges, and German engineers waited somewhere for the order to blow them. Only rearguard units remained on the western bank, volunteers who had sworn to fight to the last round rather than surrender the city. Eagle 7 rounded a corner and entered a broader avenue. The twin spires of Cologne Cathedral rose ahead, perhaps half a mile distant. The cathedral had survived the bombing through what many soldiers openly called a miracle. 262 raids had reduced the surrounding city to fragments, yet the medieval structure stood almost untouched. Its Gothic towers had become navigation points for every unit fighting in the city. Every map reference started from the cathedral. Every radio transmission mentioned the spires as a landmark that could not be mistaken for anything else. The Pershing advanced another block, then another. The streets grew wider as they approached the city center, and more dangerous with every yard. Wide streets meant longer sight lines. Longer sight lines meant German gunners had more time to aim before anyone could react. Smoyer kept his eye pressed to the gun sight, scanning windows and doorways one after another. His right hand rested on the turret traverse control. His left hand hovered near the trigger, ready. At 9:15, the radio delivered new orders. German tanks were operating somewhere near the cathedral square. At least 2 Panthers were confirmed, possibly a Tiger as well. American infantry had already pulled back after taking casualties. Eagle 7 was to proceed toward the cathedral and eliminate the enemy armor. Smoyer felt his mouth go dry. The Pershing had never faced a Panther in direct combat before. Every crewman aboard knew the statistics by heart. Panther frontal armor ran roughly 5 inches thick at the mantlet. Its long 75mm gun could punch through American armor at ranges where the Sherman had never stood a chance. In North Africa, and again in Normandy, single Panthers had destroyed entire American platoons before anyone even spotted the muzzle flash. The Pershing's engine rumbled steadily as McVeigh increased their speed. The cathedral spires grew larger through the periscope with every passing block, dark and jagged against a pale morning sky streaked with smoke. Inside the turret, nobody spoke. Smoyer could hear his own breathing over the intercom, quick and shallow, and beneath it the low grinding hum of the engine and the steady clank of the treads on broken pavement. Somewhere ahead, hidden among the ruins, a German tank crew was already waiting for them. Eagle 7 approached the cathedral district at 9:30 that morning. The streets narrowed again. Buildings that still stood rose 4 and 5 stories, creating urban canyons where sunlight barely reached the pavement below. A smoky haze from the morning's fires drifted between the ruins like fog rolling off a river. McVeigh slowed the Pershing to walking speed. The 46-ton tank made less noise at low throttle, but every revolution of the treads still echoed off the surrounding masonry walls, announcing their approach to anyone listening. Smoyer rotated the turret slowly, covering the left side of the street, while Davis watched the right through his bowgun periscope. The 90mm main gun swung across storefronts and alley mouths one at a time. Empty windows stared back like eye sockets in a skull. This section of Cologne had been a commercial district before the war, full of department stores and cafes and busy office buildings. Now it was a maze of collapse and shadow, where any doorway could hide a Panzerfaust team waiting patiently for a clean shot. The radio transmitted in short, urgent bursts. 2 companies of American infantry were pinned down 3 blocks east of the cathedral, caught under German machine gun fire from multiple positions, with mortar rounds falling steadily on their location. They needed armor support badly, but no Shermans could reach them. The approach streets were blocked with rubble. Only the wider avenue that Eagle 7 was following offered a clear path toward the cathedral square. Another transmission came through moments later. Two Sherman tanks from F Company had attempted to reach the cathedral from the north, operating without infantry support, a dangerous gamble in urban terrain, but F Company's riflemen were tied down fighting elsewhere. The Shermans carried orders to reconnoiter the square, identify enemy positions, then withdraw and wait for reinforcements. Early acknowledged the transmission calmly. Eagle 7 would link up with the F Company Shermans near the cathedral. 3 American tanks together could suppress enemy positions long enough for the infantry to advance. It was standard combined arms tactics, the kind of operation the 3rd Armored had executed successfully dozens of times since Normandy. The Pershing rolled past a burned-out German half-track. Its crew lay nearby, killed by American machine gun fire sometime in the previous 24 hours. Beyond the half-track, the street opened into a small plaza. A stone fountain stood at its center, dry now and pockmarked with shell fragments. The avenue continued straight ahead toward the cathedral spires, close enough now that the details of the Gothic stonework had become visible. At 9:47, Smoyer heard a sound through his headset that made his stomach drop. 2 rapid booms, heavy caliber, echoing from somewhere ahead. Then silence. Then a 3rd boom, tank gunfire, unmistakably. The characteristic crack and thump of high-velocity rounds striking armor plate followed a half-second later. A moment after that, the radio erupted with frantic transmissions. An F Company Sherman had been hit, crew bailing out. A second Sherman was taking fire. The German tank's exact position was unknown, but it was close to the cathedral. All units were advised that a Panther was operating somewhere in the cathedral vicinity. Early's voice came through the intercom, calm despite the chaos on the radio. Eagle 7 would continue forward. They were the only American tank in position to engage. The F Company Shermans were likely destroyed or disabled. Infantry could not advance while a German tank controlled the square. The mission had not changed. Eliminate the enemy armor. McVeigh shifted gears, and the Pershing accelerated slightly, still slow by open field standards, but faster than the careful crawl they had maintained through the narrow streets. Speed meant more noise, and noise meant the Germans would hear them coming. But speed also meant less time exposed in any single position. Urban combat was always a calculation of risk against risk, with no option that was truly safe. Smoyer checked his ammunition. The ready rack held 6 90mm rounds within arm's reach, 3 armor-piercing, 3 high-explosive. DeRiggi had positioned additional rounds throughout the turret, organized carefully by type. In a prolonged engagement, they could fire 20 rounds before needing to restock from the hull storage below. Against a Panther, though, the fight would likely end after the first 2 or 3 shots. Either Eagle 7 would destroy the German tank quickly, or the German tank would destroy Eagle 7. Armor versus armor combat rarely lasted long once the first round left the barrel. The street ahead curved slightly to the left. Beyond the curve, the cathedral square would come into view. Somewhere in that square, or on one of the streets feeding into it, a Panther crew was waiting, already credited with killing men from both American Sherman crews that morning. They knew more Americans were coming. Smoyer pressed his eye against the rubber cushion of the gun sight. His finger moved to rest against the trigger. The turret traverse control felt solid and cool under his right hand. Eagle 7 rounded the curve at roughly 15 miles an hour, tracks clanking against the broken pavement, exhaust streaming from the engine grills behind them. The cathedral spires filled the forward vision blocks entirely now. The cathedral square came into view at 9:52. The Gothic structure dominated the skyline above them, its twin spires rising more than 500 feet above the rubble. The plaza in front of the cathedral measured roughly 300 yards across. Once it had been paved with smooth stone, now shell craters and debris covered nearly every inch of the surface. The Hohenzollern Bridge was visible beyond the cathedral, spanning the Rhine, and German engineers had already rigged it with enough explosives to drop the entire span into the river below. Smoke drifted across the square from fires still burning in nearby buildings. Through the haze, Smoyer could see the first Sherman. It sat motionless in the middle of a street running perpendicular to Eagle 7's avenue, angled slightly, as if it had stopped suddenly. Smoke poured from the open commander's hatch. The gun tube pointed skyward at an awkward, broken angle. McVeigh brought Eagle 7 to a halt 1 block short of the square, in the shadow of a partially collapsed office building. From this position, the crew could observe the plaza without exposing themselves. Early studied the scene carefully through his vision blocks. The Sherman had been hit at least twice, probably within seconds of each other. Precise, professional gunnery. Whoever commanded that Panther knew their business. The second Sherman was not visible from Eagle 7's position. Radio reports placed it somewhere on the northern edge of the square, also disabled. That meant the German tank held clear fields of fire, covering multiple approaches to the cathedral. Any American vehicle attempting to cross the square in the open would be targeted almost immediately. Early made his decision. He would reconnoiter on foot. Leaving the Pershing exposed and stationary was dangerous, but advancing blind into a prepared ambush was worse. He needed to see the German tank's exact position before committing Eagle 7 to the attack. He climbed out through the turret hatch and dropped down to the street. An American soldier appeared from a doorway 30 yards ahead. Technical Sergeant Jim Bates of the Army Signal Corps carried a 16mm film camera and a rucksack loaded with film magazines. Bates had been assigned to document the 3rd Armored Division's operations since Normandy. He filmed combat footage, interviewed soldiers, recorded the liberation of towns and cities as the division fought its way east. His footage sometimes appeared in newsreels, shown in American movie theaters back home. Bates had been with an infantry squad when the first Sherman was hit. He had filmed the German tank's muzzle flash, the impact against the Sherman's turret, the crew struggling to escape. He already had clear footage of the entire engagement. Now he wanted more. The presence of an American heavy tank in Cologne was newsworthy on its own. A battle between a Pershing and a Panther would be extraordinary. Early and Bates moved forward together, staying close to the building walls. They reached a corner from which they could observe the cathedral square without stepping into the open. Early scanned the plaza methodically, section by section. The disabled Sherman sat clearly visible. Beyond it, partially concealed by a side street, he spotted the Panther. The German tank sat in a nearly perfect ambush position, its gun facing down the avenue where the Shermans had first approached. The long 75mm barrel extended from the angular turret like a finger, pointing directly at the kill zone it had already claimed. The Panther's crew had chosen their position with real skill. They could cover the entire square while remaining partially hidden from anyone approaching from the north. Any American tank entering that way would expose its most vulnerable side armor the moment it crossed into the open. Early studied the geometry of the square. The Panther could not currently see Eagle 7's position, since a building blocked the line of sight completely. But if Eagle 7 advanced straight into the square, the Germans would spot them within seconds. A frontal engagement across 300 yards of open ground favored neither tank especially. Both guns could penetrate the other's front armor at that range. But there was another option. A side street ran roughly parallel to Eagle 7's current avenue. If the Pershing could loop around the block, they might be able to approach from the west instead. The Panther's gun currently faced north. Its turret would need to rotate significantly to engage a new threat coming from the west. Turret rotation took time, not much, perhaps 3 or 4 seconds, but possibly enough. Enough for one clean shot. Early returned to Eagle 7 and explained the plan over the intercom. They would advance down the parallel street. At the intersection closest to the cathedral, they would turn left and enter the square from an angle. The Panther would then sit roughly 90 degrees off Eagle 7's gun, giving Smoyer a clear shot at the German tank's side armor, the thinnest armor on the vehicle, the killing shot if he could land it fast enough. McVeigh acknowledged the plan. DeRiggy loaded an armor-piercing round and locked the breech. Davis readied the bowgun. Smoyer rotated the turret until the main gun pointed right, anticipating the angle they would need the moment they reached the intersection. The Pershing's engine revved, and the heavy tank began rolling forward once again. Bates positioned himself in a second-story window overlooking the cathedral square, his camera ready and rolling. Eagle 7 entered the side street at 9:58. The avenue was narrower than the main approach, barely wide enough for the Pershing's bulk to pass through cleanly. Building fragments littered the pavement everywhere. McVeigh navigated carefully around a crater, keeping the tank moving at a steady, deliberate speed. Too slow, and they would present an easy target the moment they were spotted. Too fast, and Smoyer would not be able to aim properly when the moment came. The intersection ahead appeared through the driver's vision blocks. Beyond it, the cathedral square opened out to the right. Smoyer kept his eye pressed to the gun sight, watching the exact angle where the Panther should appear. His finger rested lightly on the trigger. The turret was already traversed 90 degrees to the right. When they cleared the corner, the German tank should be sitting directly in his sight picture. Should be. Combat never matched the plan exactly. Not once. Not for anyone. 50 yards from the intersection. 40 yards. 30. McVeigh maintained speed. The engine noise would alert the Panther crew regardless of how carefully they moved. The Germans would hear the Pershing before they ever saw it. But sound took time to locate precisely, and direction was genuinely difficult to judge in these echoing streets. The German commander would need several seconds just to identify where the threat was actually coming from. 20 yards. Eagle 7's bow emerged from the side street into the intersection. McVeigh's periscope gave him a limited view to the right. He saw the Panther immediately. The German tank sat almost exactly where Early had described, roughly 110 yards away. The distance was point-blank range for a 90mm gun, but the Panther's turret was already moving. The long barrel was rotating toward them. Someone inside the German tank had spotted the Pershing faster than anyone had expected. McVeigh made a split-second decision. He did not stop the tank. Stopping would leave Eagle 7 stationary, and a stationary tank in an open intersection was a dead tank. He gunned the throttle instead. The Pershing lurched forward into the intersection, crossing directly through the German tank's line of fire. Smoyer saw the Panther fill his sight, the angular turret, the long gun, the dark muzzle swinging toward him. Every instinct in his body screamed that he was staring straight down the barrel of a 75mm cannon that could punch through his armor at this range without much trouble at all. Training took over where instinct failed. Smoyer did not wait for the Pershing to come to a stop. American tank crews rarely fired accurately on the move, since the gun was not stabilized and accuracy dropped sharply once the vehicle was in motion. But stopping meant dying. He compensated for the motion as best he could, led the target slightly, and squeezed the trigger. The 90mm gun fired at 9:59 and 12 seconds. The armor-piercing round crossed 110 yards of open space in a fraction of a second and struck the Panther's turret face just below the gun mantlet. The impact was visible even through the muzzle flash and smoke, a shower of sparks erupting from the point of contact. Metal fragments spalled off the interior surface of the German turret, instantly becoming shrapnel inside the crew compartment. Inside the Panther, Oberleutnant Wilhelm Bartelborth tried to process what he was seeing in the half-second before the shot landed. The strange tank that had appeared in the intersection was too low and too angular to be an ordinary Sherman. It looked almost German in silhouette. He hesitated, unsure whether he was looking at a friend or an enemy, and told his gunner to hold fire. That hesitation lasted perhaps half a second. Then the impact came, and there was no more time to decide anything. McVeigh brought Eagle 7 to a full stop in the middle of the intersection, fully exposed now, with no cover anywhere nearby. But stationary meant Smoyer could finally aim with precision. DeRiggi already had a second armor-piercing round in his hands. The breech was open. He slammed the round home and locked it in place. Smoyer had not taken his eye from the sight for even a moment. The first shot had struck high, a good hit, but not immediately catastrophic. The Panther was still operational. He adjusted his aim point lower, targeting the hull side just beneath the turret ring, where the German tank's side armor was thinner than its front, roughly 40mm instead of 80. A 90mm round would punch through that easily. He fired again at 9:59 and 17 seconds. The second round struck the Panther's right side, penetrating the armor plate cleanly and continuing straight through the crew compartment before exiting through the left side armor, leaving two holes roughly the size of dinner plates. Inside the tank, systems began failing rapidly. Hydraulic lines ruptured. Ammunition began to ignite. Bartleby threw open his hatch and jumped clear, landing on the street behind the Panther, away from Eagle 7's line of fire. 3 other crewmen followed him out, scrambling through their hatches as thick smoke began pouring from the engine compartment. One man did not make it out in time. Smoyer fired a third time at 9:59 and 23 seconds. The round struck low on the turret, just above where the hull met the turret basket. Fire erupted instantly from the impact point and spread quickly, fed by leaking fuel and burning hydraulic fluid. Within seconds, the entire Panther was engulfed in flame. In the second-story window, Jim Bates kept his camera running the entire time. He had captured the whole engagement from start to finish, 45 seconds from the first shot to the moment the Panther was fully ablaze. The film showed everything clearly: the Pershing entering the intersection, the German gun rotating toward them, the muzzle flashes, the impacts, the crew bailing out into the smoke. Smoyer sat back from the gun sight. His hands were shaking badly, though he had not noticed until that moment. The Panther was destroyed. Eagle 7 was intact. Everyone in the crew was alive and unhurt. The Pershing had proven itself in the one fight that mattered most. The Panther burned for the next 3 hours. Ammunition continued cooking off inside the hull, sending sparks and metal fragments into the air at irregular intervals. By noon, the fire had consumed everything flammable inside the wreck. The turret sat at an odd, heat-warped angle, blackened from the flames. American troops moved cautiously into the cathedral area by early afternoon. Bates descended from his observation post and approached Eagle 7. The crew stood beside the Pershing, smoking cigarettes and checking the tank carefully for damage. They had taken no hits at all. The Panther had never fired a single round. Bartleby's half-second of hesitation had cost his crew those critical, irreplaceable seconds. By 1400 hours, additional American units had secured the cathedral area completely. Engineers began checking the Hohenzollern Bridge for demolition charges. Infantry squads cleared the surrounding buildings methodically, room by room. Resistance in the immediate area was light. Most German forces had already retreated during the engagement with the Panther, since the sound of heavy tank guns firing in the city center told them their defensive position was collapsing fast. But the battle for Cologne was not finished yet. German units still held portions of the city east of the cathedral, and isolated strongpoints still needed to be cleared out one at a time. Eagle 7 received new orders to continue the advance. The crew remounted, and McVeigh started the engine again. The Pershing rolled deeper into the ruined city. At 14:32, Eagle 7 entered a narrow street a few blocks from the cathedral. Buildings rose on both sides, creating a corridor barely wider than the tank itself. Ahead, the street opened into a small intersection, and beyond it the route continued toward the riverbank. A black automobile appeared suddenly from a side street, racing across the intersection at high speed, weaving between scattered debris. To Smoyer, it looked like a staff car. German officers sometimes used similar vehicles to move quickly between command posts. In urban combat, any unidentified vehicle moving fast was treated as a potential threat, since civilians had supposedly been evacuated from the fighting weeks earlier. Smoyer opened fire with the coaxial machine gun. Tracer rounds streaked across the intersection. Several rounds struck the car's body panels. Glass shattered, but the vehicle did not stop. It continued across the intersection and disappeared down another street. At the same moment, from a concealed position to Smoyer's left, a German Panzer IV opened fire on the same car with its own machine gun. The tank sat hidden behind a partially collapsed building, invisible to Eagle 7's crew. Its gunner, an 18-year-old named Gustav Schaefer, had spotted the same vehicle and engaged it independently. The combined fire from both tanks raked the car. The vehicle jerked to a sudden stop. The driver slumped forward over the wheel. A passenger door swung open, and a figure fell out onto the street and did not move again. Smoyer caught the muzzle flash from the German tank a moment later, a Panzer IV, an older model, less dangerous than the Panther but still capable of destroying a Sherman outright. Against a Pershing, the odds favored the American tank clearly, but the Panzer's position was good, tucked behind solid cover, while Eagle 7 sat exposed in the open street. The German tank began withdrawing, backing deeper into its concealed position behind the collapsed building. Smoyer could see only the front edge of the hole where the Panzer sat, not enough to guarantee a killing shot from this angle. The Panzer disappeared almost completely behind the rubble. McVeigh tried to maneuver Eagle 7 for a better firing angle, but the narrow street limited their movement severely. The building concealing the German tank was a 4-story residential structure. Its front facade had already collapsed from earlier bombing, but the rear portion still stood upright. Interior walls were visible through the gap where the front wall used to be. The Panzer was somewhere behind those walls, repositioning for another shot at Eagle 7. Smoyer made a decision. He could not see the German tank directly, but he could see the building sheltering it. He rotated the turret until the 90mm gun pointed at the base of the standing wall section, and DeRiggi loaded a high explosive round, the kind designed to destroy fortifications and buildings rather than armor. Smoyer aimed for the corner support where the structural integrity of the wall was weakest. The gun fired at 14:34 and 48 seconds. The high explosive round detonated against the brick and concrete, tearing away a section of the corner support roughly 6 feet wide. For a moment, nothing happened. Then physics took over completely. Without its corner support, the entire wall section lost stability all at once. 4 stories of masonry and wooden beams began to collapse inward on themselves. Tons of rubble crashed down, filling the space where the Panzer IV had been concealed a moment earlier. The noise echoed through the street like rolling thunder. Dust clouds billowed outward, obscuring visibility for several long seconds. When the dust finally cleared, the building was simply gone. In its place sat a mountain of broken stone and twisted metal. Somewhere beneath that pile, a German tank sat buried in the wreckage. Inside that tank, Gustav Schaefer and his tank commander had only seconds to escape before the rubble sealed them inside completely. Schaefer and his commander clawed their way out of the Panzer IV through the turret hatch, rubble already covering most of the hull. Dust filled the air so thick it became difficult to breathe. They scrambled over broken masonry and twisted steel beams, moving away from the American tank as quickly as they could in case more rounds followed. The rest of their crew remained inside the buried vehicle briefly, attempting to extract themselves through other hatches. Within a few desperate minutes, all 4 crew members had escaped the wreck. They disappeared into the ruins, making their way carefully toward the river. By nightfall, they had crossed the Rhine and surrendered to American military police on the far bank. Eagle 7 continued operations in Cologne for another 2 days. The city fell completely to American forces by March 8th. Engineers secured the Hohenzollern Bridge before German demolition teams could destroy it, though other bridges across the Rhine had already been blown by retreating German units. The cathedral stood intact through it all, a Gothic monument rising above total devastation on every side. Bates's footage of the Panther engagement reached newsreel editors within a week of the battle. The film appeared in American movie theaters by late March. Smoyer's sister saw it playing at a local cinema back in Pennsylvania. She recognized her own brother on the screen and brought their parents to see the same screening the following day, sitting in the dark theater and watching Clarence fire the shots that had already made him, without his knowledge, a small piece of American newsreel history. Eagle 7 remained in the fight for weeks after Cologne fell, pushing deeper into a collapsing Germany, but the war took one more blow from the 3rd Armored Division before it ended. On March 30th, Major General Maurice Rose was riding at the front of a column south of Paderborn. His command style had never changed. He still led from forward positions, refusing to direct operations from a rear headquarters like most generals of his rank. Late in the afternoon, his jeep ran into a German tank unit that had broken through American lines. Tiger tanks blocked the road ahead. Rose's driver tried to evade, but a Tiger commander cut the jeep off entirely. The German soldier climbed halfway out of his hatch and pointed a machine pistol down at the vehicle. Rose reached toward his holster. Whether to surrender his sidearm or to resist, no one would ever know for certain. The German fired. Rose was hit several times and died instantly, becoming the highest-ranking American officer killed by enemy fire anywhere in the European theater. His body was recovered the next day by elements of his own division. Smoyer's unit took part in the recovery operation. Rose's death struck the entire division hard. Soldiers who had served under him since North Africa struggled to process the loss of a commander who had always taken the same risks he asked of his men. His funeral was held at the Netherlands American Cemetery in Margraten, and thousands of soldiers attended. The war continued without him. The 3rd Armored pushed east through April, running into pockets of resistance that collapsed quickly once seriously engaged. By late April, German units were surrendering en masse across the entire front. The Wehrmacht had effectively ceased to exist as an organized fighting force. On May 7th, Germany surrendered unconditionally. May 8th was declared Victory in Europe Day. Smoyer remained in Germany through the summer as part of the occupation force. Eagle 7 was eventually shipped back to the United States for display and study. The Ordnance Department wanted to analyze the Pershing's combat performance in detail. Engineers documented every scratch and dent in the armor plate. Ballistic experts measured the wear inside the gun barrel. Maintenance crews noted every mechanical issue the tank had developed in combat. By September of 1945, Smoyer received orders to return home. He sailed from Bremerhaven to New York aboard a crowded troop transport, a voyage that took 8 days. He arrived at Fort Dix, New Jersey for processing, and within a week he received his discharge papers. Corporal Clarence Smoyer, United States Army, was released from active duty on September 24, 1945. He returned to Pennsylvania, to familiar streets, and to people who still remembered him as the quiet kid who had never once wanted to fight anybody. He found steady work at a cement plant. He married Melba Whitehead in 1946, and together they had 3 children. He rarely spoke about the war to anyone, not even his own family, but the war had not finished with him, no matter how quiet he kept it. At night he dreamed about Cologne, about the cathedral spires rising above drifting smoke, about the Panther burning in the square, and about a black automobile racing across an intersection, caught helplessly between American and German guns, about a figure falling from the passenger door onto the cobblestones below. That single image would haunt Clarence for the next 68 years of his life. For decades, Smoyer carried the full weight of that moment alone. The woman in the car. The figure that fell to the street and never moved again. He did not know who she had been. He did not know for certain whether his own bullets had killed her or whether the German tank's fire had been responsible instead. He knew only that she was dead and that he had pulled the trigger that morning along with everyone else involved. His wife Melba noticed the nightmares over the years. He would wake up some nights, swinging his fists at enemies only he could see in the dark. The memories stayed so vivid that 5 decades sometimes felt like 5 days to him. Life did not spare the family further pain either. His son Barry died of a heroin overdose in the 1970s, a loss Smoyer rarely discussed with anyone outside his closest family. Melba developed Alzheimer's disease later in life and eventually forgot his name entirely. She passed away in 2017, after 71 years of marriage to him. The people who had anchored Smoyer's civilian life for so long were slowly gone. The war somehow remained. In 1996, at the age of 72, Smoyer saw Jim Bates's footage of Cologne for the first time since the war, when an old friend told him he had spotted their duel with the Panther in a documentary called Scenes of War. The film included the cathedral duel, but it also showed something Smoyer had never seen clearly during the actual battle: the black automobile, the machine gun fire converging from two directions, the passenger falling from the car onto the street, a young woman, dead. The footage confirmed the fear Smoyer had carried silently for 50 years. He might have killed a civilian with his own hands. The knowledge was crushing, but it also created, for the first time, a real need for resolution. He wanted to know who she had been. He wanted to find her family and apologize, though he did not fully believe he deserved forgiveness from anyone. It took him nearly 2 more decades to act on that need. In 2013, at the age of 89, Smoyer finally returned to Cologne. A German journalist had spent months researching the incident and had identified the victim as Katharina Esser, 26 years old, the youngest of 4 sisters. She had spent her days caring for her aging parents, while her older sisters married and started families of their own. She worked as a clerk in a small grocery store and took night classes in home economics on the side. On March 6, 1945, she and her employer had tried to escape the city center by car. They drove directly into the crossfire between Eagle 7 and Gustav Schaefer's hidden Panzer IV. Because she had been found without identification papers afterward, she was initially laid to rest among Cologne's unnamed war dead, and it took the journalist's careful research decades later to finally put a name to her grave. The journalist arranged a meeting at the place where Katharina Esser had been laid to rest. Smoyer arrived expecting to stand there alone with his guilt. Instead, he found Gustav Schaefer already waiting for him, the same German gunner whose Panzer IV had also opened fire on the car that morning, the same young soldier who had been buried alive under a collapsed building minutes later, after Eagle 7's high-explosive round brought the walls down around him. They were both 18 years older now than they had been in 1945. Both men had carried the same private conviction for decades. Both believed, quietly and separately, that they were the one who had killed Katharina Esser. They met on the steps of Cologne Cathedral, the same cathedral whose spires had guided both of their tanks through the ruins nearly 70 years earlier. Smoyer extended his hand first. Schaefer took it without hesitation. Neither man ever learned with certainty whose bullets had actually killed her. Perhaps it had been both of them together. Perhaps it had been neither, and some other round entirely. The chaos of close urban combat made real certainty impossible, then and now. What mattered in the end was simple. They had both fired that morning. They shared the responsibility, whatever it truly was. And when Katharina Esser's surviving family later learned the full story, they did not blame either soldier for her death. They blamed the war itself, and the man who had started it. Schaefer had brought yellow roses, and he placed them gently at the resting place. Smoyer knelt down to do the same, and lost his balance for a moment. Schaefer caught him before he could fall. 2 old men who had once tried very hard to kill each other now stood holding one another up at the grave of the woman who had been caught between them. They became close friends after that reunion. Letters crossed the Atlantic regularly. Video calls connected a small house in Pennsylvania with Schaefer's home in Germany. They discussed the war not as old enemies, but as 2 men who had somehow both survived it and were still trying, even in their 90s, to understand what it had cost them. Schaefer died in 2017. Smoyer sent flowers to the funeral, along with a short note that read simply, "I will never forget you, your brother in arms, Clarence." On September 18, 2019, Clarence Smoyer received the Bronze Star for Valor at a ceremony in Washington, 74 years after the battle that had defined his life. He was 95 years old, the last surviving member of Eagle 7's crew. His fellow crewmen, Early, DeRiggi, Davis, and McVeigh, received their own medals posthumously, accepted by their families in their place. Clarence Smoyer died on September 30, 2022, at his home in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He was 99 years old. Every year since 2013, on the 6th of March, yellow roses have quietly appeared at Katharina Esser's resting place in Cologne. Someone still remembers her. Someone still keeps apologizing, year after year, long after the men who fired that morning are both gone. The Panther still burns in old photographs, frozen forever in front of Cologne Cathedral. The Pershing that destroyed it now sits inside a museum in the United States, and Bates's 45 seconds of film footage still exists, quietly changing how a generation once understood armored warfare. But the real story was never really about the tanks at all. It was about a handful of young men sent to war, ordered to kill, who spent the rest of their long lives trying, in whatever small ways they could, to make peace with what they had done.